Hello there, welcome back to the channel. This is Nerdworld, and today we're venturing into the deep, dark depths of the Mirror Universe and looking at the ISS Charon, the floating palace in space and de facto flagship of Starfleet and the Terran Empire. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and I should also mention, with a great deal of cringe on my behalf, that I have now started my own Patreon. Don't expect anything from anybody, but I am trying to make this channel grow. If you feel inclined to help me with that so that I can buy better equipment and better anything, that will be greatly appreciated. The link is in the description below. There's also some merch on there that I've done for various different tiers of Patreon, if that's interesting to anyone. Other than that, with that cringe out of the way, let's get into this on the ISS Charon. This ship was the flagship of the Imperial Starfleet. At the time, of course, it would be succeeded by the ISS Enterprise in that role. This was a fairly distinctive starship, and it was bloody gigantic. One of its main distinguishing features, other than its sheer size and its catamaran-like hull and general basking shark-like appearance, was the fact that the vessel was powered, or at least had at its core, a massive mycelial drive. This was not used in the same way it was in the primary universe. These being Terrans, they looked for a way to weaponize it, and being very, very simple A to B kinds of people, they went with weaponizing as in making weapons out of it, rather than the way the Federation went and having a new form of propulsion which could be weaponized if needed. This gave the vessel enormous power, but was also destructive to the mycelial network and was causing a cascade collapse within the network, which was eventually going to become irreparable. But that beside the point, the ship is still very impressive even without the mycelial drive. It did give it a huge amount of power reserve to power some phenomenally advanced weapons. The exact weapons the ship carried is unknown, but it certainly carried extremely high yield energy weapons and very, very high yield torpedoes, which were seen to decimate practically half of a planet's surface in just a few shots. And this can be presumably not the weapons at full power. The Charon itself was, as I said, absolutely enormous. Now, I can't find any canonical examples of exactly how big this ship is, but we can extrapolate, and I did a bit of research, and I found other people who've done this before me have tried to figure out exactly how big this ship is, comparing it to the Discovery, which we roughly know how big it is, and the Discovery is a hell of a lot bigger than I thought it was actually. Different sources give different exacting numbers for the Discovery as being between 650 and 750 meters in length, which I didn't think it was that big, but apparently. And we can see the Discovery literally fly through the ship, so that gives us a very, very big ship, to put it mildly. So going off the scale of the Discovery being about 750 meters in length, and then we scale up to what measurements I could find, looks like the ship was roughly 3 times the size of Deep Space Nine, or Terok Nor, whichever you want to call it, which gives us this scale. And as I said, this is huge. Now, I did think the ship was smaller than this, so this is an approximate estimation, and I'm being very generous, I think, with the Discovery, which I didn't think was that big, but apparently it is. Okay. Anyway, other things to note about the Charon that make it fairly distinctive. I noted that this was also the palace of the Empress Georgiou and leader of the Terran Empire, to become sort of mobile base of operations and command center for the Empress when she wasn't on Earth. As a result, there was a huge apartment block built onto the top of the ship, which was literally a palace for the Empress to live in. Now, a ship of this size, you can easily see you're going to make room for something of that nature to fill up all that space inside the ship. In addition to that, the vessel, of course, carried Starfleet personnel as well as her personal guard. The ship's overall commanding officer was a Captain Maddox, who I will probably do a video on independently about him at some point, but he was the Terran Starfleet officer in command of the day-to-day operations of the ship when the Empress was not aboard. So, it was designed to work as a seat of government and mobile platform, which I found very strange that in the one time we do see the ship, it wasn't escorted by additional Starfleet vessels, although we do note that it's not meant to have, its location is meant to be kept a secret, so ships aren't always near to it anyway, and they tend to keep their distance, and you have to be brought to it. But all that the same, this was a formidable and impressive vessel. It's, again, there are interestingly many things, and this is one of, unfortunately, Discovery's failings sometimes. We don't know much about this ship. We know what it could do, some of its abilities, but we don't know. We can infer, should I say. We can infer things, but we don't know them as concrete. We don't know how powerful its shields were, but we can assume that they were bloody strong considering the weapons. We don't actually know how fast it was. It's never mentioned that it had a spore drive, as in it had that kind of propulsion, so it probably didn't, but it certainly did have warp capability and would have been, we can assume, an extremely fast vessel for its time period. Whether it could match speeds of ships like an Intrepid class starship of the Federation from 100 years later, or whether it was more in the old warp scale and was more along the lines of what the NCC 1701 Enterprise was capable of, its version of Warp 9. Not entirely clear. We do know it carried multiple auxiliary craft shuttles and probably fighters as well, but again, only inferring that. The vessel was built in 2255 and was destroyed in 2256 by the USS Discovery, posing as the ISS Discovery, which ultimately was responsible for the vessel's destruction by destroying the containment around the spore mycelial core, should I say, and resulted in the destruction of the vessel. And of course, Giorgio was rescued and taken to the primary universe, as they quite arrogantly call it sometimes. So, there we have the ISS Charon, named, of course, for the Greek minor god who was responsible for ferrying souls into hell. So, slightly strange name, considering this was the ship that was designed to ferry the Empress around. But all the same, it could also simply be named after one of Pluto's moons. Either way, a badass ship for a badass emperor for a badass empire. So let me know in the comments below what you think of this ship. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Is it just so not Starfleet? But bear in mind, as Doug Drexler once said in an interview, I think it was on Trek Yards, where he mentioned once that he would have believed that the Terrans would have built much more militaristic ships. It didn't make as much sense to him that they would build ships like the NX-01 in their universe as well. They may have had some similar vessels, but they simply up-gunned and up-armoured and up-shielded vessels that basically existed in the primary universe. It didn't make sense. It makes sense that a naval warship from the 20th century in both universes would have looked similar and been similar capabilities. But when you get into space travel, Starfleet was building ships that were practically built for exploration, whereas the Terrans were building ships that were supposedly practically built for war. And I think this was a very good demonstration of that train of thought. Certainly the other Terran vessels were, although aesthetically very similar superficially to their Federation counterparts, they were massively more powerful. And it makes sense that they would have had a number of ships that were not exactly the same, like this one. It was also, in beta canon sources, the inspiration for the Styx-class battlecruiser, which was seen a little of on Star Trek Online. Although this ship was substantially smaller and less powerful, it was still along this design lineage of hull geometry. Now, it's possible there were prior vessels that also carried on this hull geometry that the Empress's ship was based on. No, there's no evidence that there was other ships of the class. It seems to have been a one-of-a-kind, unless the Emperor planned on building more but never got to it. We don't know. But as I said, there could have been previous designs. We do know that the mirror universe seems to have ships in it that the primary universe doesn't have. For example, the ISS Avenger, which doesn't exist and never did exist to my knowledge in the Prime universe. Anyway, that being said, hope you enjoyed this video. If you made it all the way to the end, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and again, to awkwardly mention my Patreon, if you feel so inclined. It would be appreciated, but don't in any way think that you're obligated to. I'm going to keep making these things. It's just I would like to improve the quality of them somewhat. Anyway, if you made it all to the end, thank you for watching, and bye-bye.